Welcome to Plymouth Notch and the Calvin Coolidge State Historic Site. My name is Rob Hammer, and I work here with the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. We're thrilled to have you all joining us here today to celebrate not only the birth of our country, but also the birth of our 30th President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge was born here 147 years ago today in the house you'll just see to your left. In celebration, we have a number of exciting activities planned here today that we hope you'll join in. These include a naturalization ceremony where 19 immigrants will become U.S. citizens, and the final debate rounds of our Coolidge Cup National High School Debate Tournament. But to kick things off, we thought, what better way to begin the day than a reading of the Declaration of Independence. To lead us through our program, we have a very special guest joining us today. If you don't know him from his many television and radio appearances, or his numerous books, you may recognize him from his syndicated column, which is one of the most widely distributed and read in America. Please join me in welcoming Cal Thomas.
Well, thank you very much, Robin. You may be asking yourself, why would they invite a guy like me here? Well, the answer is, I work cheap. What can I say? So this is, I think, the 6th or 7th visit I've made here, and I've always enjoyed it. It's like someone pushed the pause button, and it's 1924 again. It's just a wonderful place, peaceful, and you can learn so much here, not just about President Coolidge, but about the principles for which he stood, which are eternal. Industry, self-control. One of my favorite lines of his was, my biggest accomplishment was minding my own business. I think that's something that probably would work today. More people in politics on both sides of the aisle practiced it. Well, we want to thank you for coming. We're really glad you're here and honored that you would be here. We've gathered to read the Declaration of Independence. Now, there are a couple of things that are going to sound very ancient about this document. And as a commentator, I want to comment a little bit on it before we start reading it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Truths. Isn't that what is missing from so much of our political dialogue today? Nobody can agree on anything. Nobody can agree, even if truth exists, that all men, meaning the human race, not just the male gender, of course, were created equal, not evolved from slime, not that we like bananas on our cereal because our nearest relative is down at the zoo, but are created equal and endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, why did the founders write this? They were not all religious. They wrote those words to put certain rights out of the reach of government. If we are endowed with those rights and not granted them by the government, a big difference, then government should not be allowed to touch them. And this is part of the philosophy that was behind the creation of the Declaration of Independence and a declaration of dependence on a far higher power than what is going on in Washington. Now, to start things off, I'd like to invite all veterans and anyone on active duty to please step forward and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Do we have any who fit that category today? Any active duty or veterans here among us? Well, it appears like I'm the only veteran. I was in the Army. I will lead at the Pledge of Allegiance, and if you all stand, I think I remember all the words. Put your hands over your hearts and repeat along with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Liberty and justice for all. What an ideal that is. Now I'd like to ask and invite Mr. Bill Wiles to lead us in the singing of our national anthem. Bill, are you here?
Yes,
Oh, there you are. Very good. Okay. So
come on, please rise.
move on.
I expect lost folks. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
Freedom isn't free. Ronald Reagan used to say we're only one generation away from losing it all. So you young people who are about to inherit what we have managed to keep have a great responsibility to pass it on to the generations that follow you. It is a privilege and a responsibility. Exactly 96 years after the birth of our country, an important figure was born on the same day. He channeled the spirit of the Founding Fathers and always strove to embody the principles found in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution at the highest level of government. I'm very pleased now to announce that he joins us today here in his hometown of Plymouth Notch to share his very wise thoughts on the inspiration of the Declaration of Independence. Please join us in welcoming and wishing a happy birthday to our 30th President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge. Mr. President.
Good morning, one and all. I can't think of a place that I'd rather be on this day. It is my pleasure to share with you a few thoughts that I had delivered from a speech entitled The Inspiration of the Declaration of Independence. I hope it provides you with a meaningful context as we subsequently read the document itself. We meet to celebrate the birthday of America. Coming of a new life is always excites our interest. Although we know in the case of the individual that it has been an infinite repetition, reaching back beyond our vision, it only makes it the more wonderful. But how our interest and our wonder increase when we behold the miracle of the birth of a nation. It is to pay our tribute of reverence and respect to those who participated in such a mighty event that we annually observe the 4th day of July. Amid all the clashing, conflicting interests, amid the welter of partisan politics, every American can turn for solace and consolation to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States, the assurance and confidence that those two great charters of freedom and justice remain firm and unshaken. Whatever perils appear, whatever dangers threaten, the nation remains secure in the knowledge that the ultimate application of the law of the land will provide an adequate defense and protection. When we come to examine the action of the Continental Congress in adopting the Declaration of Independence, in the light of what was set out in that great document, and in the light of succeeding events, we cannot escape the conclusion that it had a much broader and deeper significance than a mere secession of territory and the establishment of a new nation. Events of that nature have been taking place since the dawn of history. Our empire, after another, has arisen only to crumble away as its constitution parts separated from each of one another to set up independent governments on their own. Such actions long ago have become commonplace. They have occurred too often to hold the attention of the world and command the admiration and reverence of humanity. There is something beyond the establishment of a new nation, great as that event would be, in the Declaration of Independence, which has ever since caused it to be regarded as one of the great charters that not only has been able to liberate America, but everywhere to ennoble humanity. It was not because it was proposed to establish a new nation, but because it was proposed to establish a nation on new principles that July 4th, 1776, has come to be regarded as one of the greatest days in history. Great ideas do not burst upon the world unannounced. They are reached by a gradual development over a length of time, usually proportionate to their importance. This is especially true of the principles laid down in the Declaration of Independence. 3 very definite propositions were set out in its preamble regarding the nature of mankind and thereof government. These were the doctrine that all men are created equal. They are endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that therefore the source of the just powers of government must be derived from the consent of the governed. If no one is to be accounted as born into a superior station, there is to be no ruling class, and if all possess rights which can neither be bartered away nor taken from them by an earthly power, it follows, as a matter of course, that the practical authority of the government has to rest on the consent of the governed. Well, these principles were not altogether new in political action. They were very far from new in political speculation. They had never been assembled before and had declared in such a combination. But remarkable as this may be, it is not the chief distinction of the Declaration of Independence. The importance of political speculation is not to be underestimated, as I shall presently disclose. Until the idea is developed and the plan made, there can be no action. It was the fact that our Declaration of Independence, containing these immortal truths, was the political action of a duly authorized and constituted representative public body in its sovereign capacity, supported by the force of general opinion and by the armies of Washington already in the field, which makes it the most important civil document in the world. It was not only the principles they declared, but the fact that therewith a new nation was born, which was founded upon those principles, and which from that time forth in its development has actually maintained those principles that makes this pronouncement an incomparable event in the history of government. It was an assertion that a people had arisen, determined to make every necessary sacrifice for the support of these truths, and by their practical application, bring the War of Independence to a successful conclusion and adopt the Constitution of the United States with all that is meant to civilization. Placing every man on a plane where he acknowledged no superiors, where no one possessed any right to rule over him, he must inevitably choose his own rulers through a system of self-government. This was their theory of democracy. In those days, such doctrines would scarcely have been permitted to flourish and spread in any other country. This was the purpose which the fathers cherished. In order that they might have freedom to express these thoughts and opportunity to put them into action, whole congregations with their pastors had migrated to these colonies. These great truths were in the air that our people breathed. Whatever else we may say of it, the Declaration of Independence was profoundly American. This apprehension of the facts be correct, and the documentary evidence would appear to verify it, then certain conclusions are bound to follow. A spring will cease to flow if its source be dried up. A tree will wither if its roots be destroyed. In its main features, the Declaration of Independence is a great spiritual document. It is a declaration, not of material, but of spiritual conceptions. Equality, liberty, popular sovereignty, the rights of man. These are not elements which we can see and touch. They are ideals. They have their source in their roots of religious convictions. They belong to the unseen world. Unless the faith of the American people in these religious convictions is to endure, the principles of our Declaration will perish. We cannot continue to enjoy the result if we neglect and abandon the cause. We are too prone to overlook another conclusion. Governments do not make ideals, but ideals make governments. This is both historically and logically true. Of course, the government can help us sustain ideals and can create institutions through which they can be better observed, but their source, by their very nature, is in the people. The people have to bear their own responsibilities. There is no method by which that burden can be shifted to the government. It is not the enactment, but the observance of laws that creates the character of a nation. About the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It is often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, that we have had new thoughts and new experiences which have given us a great advance over the people of that day, and that we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great chapter. If all men are created equal, that is final. If they are endowed with certain inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the government, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth of the soundness, the only direction in which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward. Towards the time when there was no equality, no rights for the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideals are not more modern, but more ancient than those of the revolutionary fathers. In the development of its institutions, America can fairly claim that it has remained true to the principles which were declared 150 years ago, and all the essentials that have achieved an equality which is never possessed by any other people. Even in the less important matter of material possessions, ages, we have secured a wider and wider distribution of wealth. The rights of the individual are held sacred and protected by the constitutional guarantees which even the government itself is bound not to violate. If there is any one thing among us that is established beyond question, it is self-government, the right of the people to rule. If there is any failure in respect to any of these principles, it is because there is a failure on the part of the individuals to observe them. Under a system of popular government, there will always be those who will seek political preferment by clamoring for reform. While there is very little of this which is not sincere, there is a large portion that is not well informed. In my opinion, very little of just criticism can attach to the theories and principles of our institutions. There is far more danger of harm in them than there is hope of good in any radical changes. We do need a better understanding and comprehension of them, and a better knowledge of the foundations of government in general. Our forefathers claimed to certain conclusions and decided upon certain courses of action which have been a great blessing to the world. Before we can understand their conclusions, we must go back and review the course which they followed. We must think the thoughts that they thought. Their intellectual life centered around the meeting house. They were intent upon religious worship. While there were always among them men of deep learning, and later those who had comparatively large possessions, the mind of the people was not so much engrossed in how much they knew or how much they had, as so much as how they were going to live. While scantily provided with other literature, there was always a wide acquaintance with the Scriptures. Over a period as great as that of which measures the existence of our independence, they were subject to this discipline not only in their religious life and educational training, but also in their political thought. They were a people who came under the influence of a great spiritual development and acquired a great moral power. No other theory is adequate to explain or comprehend the Declaration of Independence. It is the product of the spiritual insight of the people. We live in an age of science and abounding accumulation of material things. But these did not create our Declaration. Our Declaration created them. The things of the Spirit must come first. Lest we cling to that, all our material prosperity, overwhelming though it may be, will turn to a barren scepter in our grasp. We are to maintain the great heritage which has been bequeathed to us. We must be like-minded as our fathers who created it. We must not sink into pagan materialism. We must cultivate the reverence which they had for the things that are holy. We must follow the spiritual and moral leadership which they showed. We must keep replenished. They may glow with the more compelling flame the altar fires before which they worshiped. Thank you.
favorite line of that speech, I read it many times. We cannot continue to enjoy the result if we neglect to abandon the cause. That was a powerful speech. He didn't get the credit that he deserved for such insights, mostly because my colleagues in the media at that time tended to denigrate him, from H.L. Mencken in the Baltimore Sun, columnist, to Will Rogers, a comedian who made fun of him often. But his principles endure, and they always endure through generations for those who embrace them. There's so many great stories about Coolidge. Some of them are probably true, others are not. One of my favorites was White House reception, when a woman greeted him and said, "Mr. President, I have a bet with a friend of mine that I can get you to say more than 2 words," to which the president responded, "You lose." Great stuff. Anyway, Mr. President, it's a great honor to have you with us today. And now I would encourage each one of you to think about the words you have heard. And more than that, go on the internet and look them up and read the whole speech for yourself. It's really a brilliant speech. As we read now through the profound words of the Declaration, I'd like to invite 5 of the Coolidge Scholars. And these are young people who, I had similar people in my high school, and I always hated them because they ruined the curve for the C students like myself. But these young people are just wonderful. I love their company. I love to listen to them, and they have bright futures ahead all. And they're going to come forward now and read the Declaration of Independence. Catherine Sylvester, Mitchell Robson, Nico Brayton, Catherine McPhee, and Sam Reddick. Please come forward and read this wonderful document. Are you here? Yes, you are. Okay. I assume you have this all done in order now, and you're okay. Okay, very good.
In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, He has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands.
He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, a standing armies without the consent of our legislators. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offices, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies.
For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people.
Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which announces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, and in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliance, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor.
As fresh today as when it was written. And in that document, Mr. Jefferson established the purpose of government when he wrote, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. To secure what rights? Why, the rights that the Creator had endowed and put out of the reach of government. Why was that necessary? Because the founders understood human nature, and they understood that if men and women would not be controlled from without by a higher power, then they needed to be controlled by a state acting under the authority of that higher power in order to promote the general welfare, provide for the common defense, and ensure domestic tranquility. The Declaration was the philosophical foundation of the United States and the Constitution which was to come. Without it, we would not be what we are today. So thank you, Coolidge Scholars, for reminding us of what the founders said and they established. And as Mr. Franklin was asked after that Constitutional Convention, what have you given us, Mr. Franklin? He said, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. So thank you, Coolidge Scholars, for reminding us of that wonderful document and the pledge that they made. Many gave their lives, virtually all gave their fortunes, but none lost his sacred honor. Great men indeed, but what happened to them after the signing of the Declaration? We're about to find out if you missed that course in history class. Now I'd like to invite Coolidge scholar Philip Meng to tell us about the price our founding fathers paid for supporting the Declaration so that we could enjoy the fruits of their sacrifices and the liberty that we enjoy today. Philip?
Have you ever wondered what happened to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence? What fate befell them for daring to put their names to that document? Well, 5 signers were captured by the British as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons serving in the Revolutionary Army. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardships of the Revolutionary War. They signed and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. So what kind of men were they? 24 were lawyers and jurists, 11 were merchants, 9 were farmers and large plantation owners, men of means, well educated. But they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured. Carter Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ships swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts and died in rags. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British that he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward. Vandals and soldiers looted the properties of Dillery, Hall, Clymer, Walton, Gwinnett, Hayward, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British General Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home for his headquarters. He quietly urged General George Washington to open fire. The home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died within a few months. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his grist mill were laid to waste. For more than a year, he lived in forests and caves, returning home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. A few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and a broken heart. Norris and Livingston suffered similar fates. Such were the stories and the sacrifices of the American Revolution. These were not wild-eyed, rabble-rousing ruffians. They were soft-spoken men of means and education. They had security, but they valued liberty more. Standing straight and unwavering, they pledged for the support of this declaration with firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They gave you and me a free and independent America. The history books never told you a lot about what happened in the Revolutionary War. We didn't just fight the British. We were British subjects at the time, and we fought our own government. Some of us take these liberties so much for granted, but we shouldn't. So, take a few minutes while enjoying your 4th of July and silently thank these patriots. It's not too much to ask for the price they paid. Remember, freedom is never free.
Thank you, Philip. Are you a U.S. citizen?
I am.
How old are you?
I am 17.
Okay, 18 years, I want you to run for president. If I'm still around, you got my vote, okay? That was brilliant. Thank you very much. And now, to conclude the event, I invite Mr. Wiles back up to the front to sing a very familiar song, penned by Irving Berlin, made famous by Kate Smith, God Bless America.
Well, Mr. Thomas, that's not what's going to happen.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's not.
That's what my script says.
I know it does, but I changed it.
You did?
I did. Because I have the liberty to do that.
It's a free country, go right ahead.
You all know that we have a national anthem. Did you know that we have a national hymn? In 1876, in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, Daniel Roberts, who was an Episcopal priest at the Church of St. Thomas and Grace Episcopal Church in Brandon, Vermont, just over the hill a little way, wrote the words to what has become known as the national hymn. God of the fathers, whose almighty hand lead forth in beauty all the starry band of shining worlds in splendor through the skies, our grateful songs before thy throne arise. Thy love divine hath led us in the past. In this free land, by thee our lot is cast. Be thou a ruler, guardian, guide, and stay. Thy word our law, thy paths our chosen way. deadly pestilence. Be thy strong arm our ever sure defense, thy true religion in our hearts increase, thy bounteous goodness nourish us in peace. Refresh thy people on their toilsome way. Lead us from night to ever-ending day. Fill all our lives with love and grace divine, and glory, Lord, and praise be ever thine.
Well done. Thank you all for coming. Now enjoy the